Our next speaker, James Lima, is the principal of James Lima Planning, which specializes in the economics of public space. James has extensive private and public sector experience in the planning and revitalization of urban centers at a variety of scales. He currently advises public and private sector clients on a range of development matters that include affordable housing, large-scale planning and development of former industrial waterfronts, downtown district growth strategies, cultural art facilities development, the economic value of investments in the public realm, and adaptive reuse of historic properties. The principal focus of all this work is on the economics of placemaking. James was most recently a partner at the real estate and economic advisory firm HR&A Advisors. Mr. Lima was New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg's appointee as founding president of the Governor's Island Preservation and Education Corporation, or GIPEC, a public corporation overseeing the planning, redevelopment, and operations of the 172-acre former military facility in New York Harbor. Mr. Lima served as a senior vice president for special projects at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where he managed initiatives focused on growth of the city's central business districts and increasing public access to the city's waterfront, including leading the planning, consensus building, and public approvals for the downtown Brooklyn redevelopment plan. James led similar efforts on the administrative's behalf in downtown Flushing, Queens, Governor's Island, and Upper Manhattan. James has earned a BA from Columbia College with a major in architecture and urban studies and stayed on there at Columbia to complete the MS Red program, or RED program, at the Harvard Kennedy School. And he participated in a program for senior executives in state and local government as a Fannie Mae Fellow. Mr. Lima is currently an assistant adjunct professor at Columbia University in the Master of Science in Real Estate Development program and is the member of the board of directors of Syracuse University School of Architecture, the Northeastern University School of Architecture, the New York Harbor Foundation, and the Interdisciplinary Journal of Contemporary Architecture, Landscape, and Urbanism called Places. Please welcome a part-time Tivertonian, James Lima.
Thank you, Tanya. Hi. Wow, Grover. Come on, let's all maybe take a deep breath. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. It's great to be here. You guys are tough acts to follow. I really enjoyed all that. I'm gonna talk about cities and a tour around the United States with a focus on New York, where a lot of my work has happened. But it's not about the places so much and the scale of urbanity and density, but really about principles that I think are replicable and apply here. As Tanya said, my work has really been at the intersection of public and private sectors and of urban design and real estate development feasibility. So a lot of it is on the implementation side, and I think the good news following discussion about climate is there are a lot of lessons to learn, and there are a lot of opportunities as cities like Newport start to think about resiliency and coastal protection, but also as you continue to grow and continue to both strengthen the historic character of the place and the things that make you unique and authentic and so desirable as an international destination for visitation. There are opportunities for new placemaking and opportunities to make this city even more livable, to have an even greater quality of life, and to be more economically competitive. Workers today, the labor pool, has never been more mobile. And so it's not really about where companies want to put their offices and bring workers. It's where workers want to live with their families and have a certain lifestyle, and the companies essentially follow that. So the opportunity for Newport, as you think about growth and preservation and land conservation paired with economic development, is what are the opportunities as we invest in new public infrastructure around resiliency, in new public infrastructure for greater streets, more beautiful parks and open spaces, repairing and replacing the old systems that we have. How are those opportunities for enhanced public realms, the organizers of civic activity, but also the organizers of significant potential future real estate development and economic generators that strengthen your tax base, that identify potential revenue streams to fund parks and open space maintenance and management? One of the things that government is reasonably good at is finding the capital dollars to build things like parks. You get a consensus vision for what the park should be, and eventually the money is cobbled together. What government is absolutely terrible at, consistently everywhere in the United States, is making sure that there's the recurring funding available for proper maintenance and management and operations of those public spaces, the parks, the open spaces, the streets. And so I want to talk a little bit about the opportunities to also embed into some of your open spaces and parks, and this usually creates some level of anxiety with some people. It's like, what are the opportunities and lessons learned and best practices to embed enhancements to these parks, which actually also happen to be revenue generators? So my work has been largely urban, but I am a Newport County resident to the core, and I was a lucky kid who grew up at Fogland Beach, and I left at 17 to go to college, and somehow I fell in love with New York City, and I never left. But I have a home at Tiverton Four Corners, and one of the things that makes me most happy is to be working out in my vegetable garden in Tiverton, and spent a lot of time growing up in Newport. So it's part of who I am, is thinking about more vibrant urban places, but also a connectedness that those places can have with the natural environments. And those things should not be mutually inconsistent. I want to talk about a resiliency project that has just been awarded a $335 million grant from HUD. That's a lot of money. And it's a project that I'm working on with Danish and Dutch planners and designers to flood protect 10 miles of flood-prone Lower Manhattan. We see it as a bold, ambitious infrastructure project, a la Robert Moses, but it's been prepared to date with a really intensive community engagement process, very much not like Robert Moses, and very much like the ethos of Jane Jacobs. And that is really a critical element, I believe, in thinking in the future about placemaking and economic growth and quality of life for Newport. There needs to be a certain boldness of vision and a clarity of what the bigger picture is, and thinking about Newport's economy in a regional context, but also a real sensitivity to the need to meaningfully engage the community in a sustained way. And that doesn't mean 6 months of charrettes. It means, what is a structural process for the continued ongoing voice for the community in a project? And so when I talk about sustainability and resiliency, it is physical resiliency, but it's also economic resiliency, so that there's an ability to maintain things to a level of quality over time. But it's also a resiliency in terms of community ownership and investment in the success and continuation of a particular initiative or a particular place. And that really takes time. And so we'll talk about processes where slow is fast, and slow and thorough collaboration is really a smart business strategy. So Lower Manhattan, as most of you know, was hit very hard by Sandy. It is not that unlike Newport in that it's a former port city that built its economy around wharfs. And in New York, those wharves eventually went away, and you can see how over time more and more of the Lower Manhattan shoreline was filled in. And those low-lying areas at the outer edge are where landfill was brought in. No surprise, those are areas where real estate values until relatively recently have been lowest, and where there's the greatest vulnerability of flooding. This is showing the FEMA flood zone for Lower Manhattan, and this is showing what happened. This is the night after Sandy. All of the power was knocked out for Lower Manhattan, millions and millions of people, with the exception of Battery Park City, which was built in the 1980s and had new standards of infrastructure. So our idea is to reconnect the city to a resilient infrastructure and to restore a durability to prevent this kind of situation happening again. Not only was power knocked out, there was massive flooding in Wall Street and neighborhoods from West 57th Street all the way down to the Battery. So it's really looking at resilient infrastructure in terms of how neighborhoods need to function, but also programming opportunities and how different communities can have different solutions. But the overarching idea, and I think this is really relevant for Newport, is the moment of creating a resiliency infrastructure at your water's edge is also a moment to think about overlaying a new civic or social infrastructure for a relatively insignificant additional cost. That new place, that new wall, that barrier, that berm, that levee, whatever that is, that should become your new most public and most wonderful place at the water's edge. So that is something that the Army Corps of Engineers has been absolutely terrible at doing. When the Army Corps of Engineers gets up in the morning, it's to build something. And they usually build barriers and things that divide communities and separate places. So our whole idea was to figure out a way to keep all this water out of this really important, historically significant, and economically enormous place of Lower Manhattan, but to do it in a way that still maintains a great public place. This is not supposed to happen at 6th Street and Avenue C, which is a very inland location in Lower Manhattan. The devastation from Sandy was awful. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but this is a water's edge location where right now there is literally a vertical wall that separates the FDR Drive, which is a north-south road that runs along the edge of the East River in Lower Manhattan, from East River Park, which is an underutilized park. And so what we've done is buried a heavy infrastructure system into a new, beautifully landscaped berm that creates new connections back to the inland. So this is an idea that has a lot of opportunity in many places. How do you create new public gathering places, enhanced systems, bikeways, natural connectors, green spaces, resilience infrastructure as a series of connectors of the assets you already have? And then the opportunity to get out into the water. I'm going to talk a lot about that. So we are looking at that project and a lot of other waterfront planning work we're doing in terms of resilient community districts and thinking of it at a district scale. And that's about creating a performance standard for protecting, but it's also about allowing for economic growth. And as much as those two things, what are the opportunities to maximize public benefit when I'm engaged in those two other things? You cannot have an economic development agenda and a flood protection agenda that doesn't really focus on what are all the ways that those two things need to happen in the context of what the community really wants in terms of parks, jobs, housing choices, and other priorities that you may have. So thinking about that sweet spot in the middle that those three things intersect, that requires a process of dialogue with communities. Now, the other value capture cycle is a critical one. And cities all over the world are looking at parks and open spaces as a central component of their economic development agenda. That sounds kind of improbable, right? How many people have been to the Highline Park in New York City? So the Highline Park, I worked on this 12 years ago when the Friends of the Highline, a fledgling not-for-profit group, came to the city of New York and said, we have this vision, everyone's really excited about it. The first phase of 3 will cost $110 million. If you, the city of New York, spend $110 million, here's a study that shows that there will be real estate value increases around it, there'll be tourist attractions that will generate revenue for the city, and you will more than pay for this investment in a 20-year payout. Well, that study was off by a factor of 2. In the 10 years since the first phase of the Highline was funded, more than $5 billion worth of new real estate investment has occurred along the Highline, which has become a destination as a park, but it's also defined a district and created a whole new neighborhood that associates itself with the Highline. So part of that was zoning that protected the park, that shifted bulk away from it, that allowed for growth as a city wants to continue to grow, but did it in a way that was very controlled and moved potential development to other sites, but also took a zoning structure that required air rights to be purchased to get that development right on other sites. And the purchase of those development rights went into a fund to pay for the Highline Park long term. The city also continues to make more commitments. Tomorrow is a very big day. The last and third section of the Highline will open to the public at the north end of the site. The city has continued to fund that park because it's so obviously an economic generator. Going back to the Big U, which is that 10-mile resiliency project in Lower Manhattan, this is a historic Battery Park where New York City began, the beginning of settlement in Lower Manhattan. It's a very historic place with historic forts. Castle Clinton is a national landmark. The National Park Service runs the monuments here and runs ferry operations out to Ellis Island and Liberty Island. So how do you integrate flood protection and enhance a park in a very historically significant place? So we've woven a berm system through a very significant grove of mature trees to try to skirt the landmarks and identified ways to flood-proof the buildings themselves. But it's sort of this complicated web of berming and then hard infrastructure that takes the form of a new reverse aquarium where you're inside the building looking at the fish on the outside of the building, and a new middle school for marine science and technology at the southern end. So it's a hard-edged building structure and then a berming system that ties back into a really diverse network of enclosures. Governor's Island, off limits for 200 years, the most storied place in the U.S. Army history. It is now a public park. I was tasked with trying to figure out what to do with it, and it is a remarkable landscape already. But again, these are opportunities where if you can't find capital funding early on, look to programming and innovation in programming. You know, a lot of our parks in the U.S. were retreats from the harsh industrial life of cities in the industrial era, right? And that's taken a while to really shift. So we've gone from having our parks in our cities being retreats and places, you know, of passive use to much more recreational and actively programmed. And so one of the things that I am asked to do often is to think about both programming and the way that some of that programming can actually generate revenue that supports the park and other public benefits. One of the things that's happening between Governor's Island that we just saw in the foreground and Lower Manhattan, which we see in the background, is repopulating New York Harbor with oyster beds, the historic ecological system of New York Harbor. It was so significantly populated with oysters that it was a navigational hazard. Oysters were everywhere. You know, what is the potential for Newport to think about its new and increased open space being in the water? How can that be part of the education opportunity? How can it be part of a coastal resiliency first line of defense to slow down wave attack? But also, how can it be part of an ecological restoration network and recreational system? I'm on the board of the New York Harbor School, which is on Governor's Island. President Clinton came for first day of class 2 weeks ago and launched the Billion Oyster Initiative, which is funded with a $5 million grant from the National Science Foundation to repopulate New York Harbor with 1 billion oysters, and that will be enough oysters to filter the water of the inner harbor of New York, if you believe this. Every 3 days, the water will be fully filtered. So it's not to eat oysters, but it's to use them as effective filters, as new flood protectors, and as restoring ecosystems that will continue to have exponential benefits. So think about the ways that you have opportunities to get the kids who live in Newport and in Newport County, to engage in the harbor, engage in, Narragansett Bay. And I'm sure a lot of this is happening already, but how can you bring that right to the heart of the city? Again, the Highline was a spectacular project, very unique. I almost hate it in a way because everywhere I work now, people say, well, what's our Highline? What do we have under our nose that we don't know about that you're gonna help us figure out that's gonna make us, instead of casinos, you're gonna create a park. But really, the other thing that it does is it connects assets. And I think that's a huge opportunity for Newporters. How can you think about your system of parks and your great streets and your great waterfront places? How can some of them be made better, but how can they be connected to one another? And to really think about it as a network. And so for work that I did at the Urban Land Institute in Galveston after Hurricane Ike a few years ago, we really looked at an economy that's very much about tourism, very much about its relationship to the water, very much about its historic character and districts, and really thought about moves that we could make that essentially are about connecting the assets they already have to one another, and to think about placemaking in their core downtown that creates a stronger economy that will support new investments like the National Laboratory that is opened there, and really reinforces their waterfront entertainment and retail district. So this was a streetscape and placemaking plan that really just kind of fine-tuned the things that were already really great there, but linking their economic engines to one another, finding opportunities to create incubator spaces in prominent locations, create a transparency of your next economy, of where your makers are making things, of where young people are interested in urban farming, about your great food culture. Put that right out there on Main Street and work with private owners and downtown merchants to think about ways to kick your retail up a notch in terms of the basically the values of what you want your future to be. It's about authenticity of place and all the things we love about our place, and that's food and its culture and its entertainment, but it's sort of the rich history of what is made here too. So it was really kind of linking assets, and then the same idea in Lexington, Kentucky, a lovely small city that is really about racehorses, bourbon, and basketball. And so we won a competition to create this new ribbon park, Town Branch Commons, which basically will unearth a stream that was the organizer of the original Lexington, Kentucky. It basically was like the sewer. And the city organized itself around that stream for that reason, and eventually it got decked over. And so this is both an archaeological excavation and a celebration of the limestone schist that is there, that is the reason that the bluegrass is so amazing for horses to eat and strengthen their bones and make them great racehorses, but also is amazing in the way that it makes the water delicious for bourbon. So it's a big part of who they are and why their economy is what it is, but it's also unique geologically. And so, how can you celebrate the things that are sort of unique about your physical place and turn them into fantastic public spaces and public places? Again, this is not a dramatic change to the development of the city, but it was a dramatic change to the public realm. This is in design now. And so some of this is aspirational, and some of it here is really looking at a district of historic cultural arts, anchors, and this very faint ghosts of potential new buildings that could be built to get more people to live in this downtown, which is one of their big challenges. A lot of people live in the beautiful outlying bluegrass communities, but how do we get more people who want to live along this beautiful, interesting, diversely programmed park, and get investment and developers interested in creating a really exciting, beautiful, high-quality urban experience. So we often look at funding sources principally with public sector partners, like, all right, what are the tools that you have? You can issue bonds. You can dedicate fees through referendum. You know, there are the classic ways that the public sector can find money. But then there's earned income, concessions that exist in parks. They're becoming increasingly sophisticated and clever and beautiful in the way that they are additive to the park experience. So it really encourages you to think about what are the ways that your parks, the ones that have the character that's more civic and more public as opposed to neighborhood character, you know, what are the ways that those can integrate more earned income opportunities, but also is there a management structure in place? Can a not-for-profit do more to program and get rental revenue for certain kinds of events? And then on the private side, creating districts, like in Lexington, is really thinking about creating a geography, and then within that geography, is there a self-taxing opportunity that says, we all agree as property owners and merchants that we're going to dedicate some small portion of the money we make back into the public realm and to the public benefit of our parks and our streets and management. In Minneapolis, finally, the most historic place in Minneapolis is the only natural waterfall on the whole Mississippi River. I had no idea there was a waterfall on the Mississippi River, but it's why Minneapolis is Minneapolis, because they took the hydropower and created sawmills, and then they created flour grist mills. And so the flour mills are still there today, Pillsbury and Gold Medal. And so the historic industrial heritage is here. It's been converted into very fancy loft apartments. But the place at the downtown is not worthy of the kind of development that has happened upland. It's a very ambitious city. Despite Rust Belt cities and like cold weather climate cities always blaming those things on why their economies don't work, Minneapolis has just like moved on and has made itself such a center of culture and of urban life and vitality that young people actually stay there and come there. And it's a huge hub for economic activity in the Midwest. And so the opportunity here is to create a great public place at this really important central location in the city. And so we're looking at creating something that really responds to the incredible topography, that responds to the density of development of the central business district just to the south, and to the cultural arts like the Guthrie Theater adjacent to it, and to really think about how we can program for everybody, free activities, places to come and eat, to perch and to sit and to look at the water. I mean, Newport has no shortage of places to come sit and look at the water, but you'd be amazed at how many cities don't have an opportunity to come to a public place and look out on the water. Now, maybe you need more public places to do that in your downtown. But it's something to think about. Is like, do you have the kind of programming that really serve the needs of everybody in the city? And what are ways to integrate that into the life of what people are doing in the downtown? One of the challenges for Minneapolis was to embrace the fact that they have cold winters. Like, how do we make the site programmed in ways that you come and you rent snowshoes for free, or you do summer concerts? You do pop-up events, easy food trucks and nighttime events where young people come together, just creating vibrancy. You do tours that really explore the historic fabric of the ruins of a place like that. A beautifully designed visitor center. I noticed your Loeb Visitor Center. It's quite lovely. And then, what are the ways to get everybody behind when you do have an opportunity to create a new park or an enhanced park? First and foremost, a compelling vision and a clear plan. You need to scale the operations of anything that you're going to embed as a revenue generator in the park, both flexibly, because you don't know what's going to happen in a place seasonally. You want designs to be very flexible, to scale up or scale down. It has to enhance the park experience. I mean, it has to be additive to the civic enjoyment of the place and respond to your needs. And make it local. We spent a huge amount of time in Minneapolis talking to the best restaurateurs, the high-quality caterers, the interesting young people who were doing CSAs, and just getting people excited about how they could be part of a new little pavilion or a little restaurant or place that would be on the waterfront. So again, that was as much about reaching out to them, creating community ownership, and letting them run with it. We kind of created the armature for it and got them excited and explained how the numbers could work and how the zoning works and how it could be cited, and went back and forth on design options. And we laid out a framework and then said, and here's how you could go ahead and implement it. And then you let a community that has lots of strong leadership and lots of creative people and lots of deep connections to that community implement. But you've given them the tools to do that. Now, every city I'm working in wants a Shake Shack. It's basically hamburgers, fries, and really good milkshakes. But the idea here was like a really nicely integrated concession that's fun. Everything about the way it's run, it's designed, it's managed, it's just fun. People, to this day, it's more than 10 years old in New York City, there's always a line. And now they're expanding everywhere, so who knows if you've got one yet or you're gonna have one soon. So finally, it's a network of park experiences that thread north-south along the river, and a relatively dainty pavilion that hopefully will have a little restaurant, cafe, place for families to stop in. And we tried to express this in terms of different kinds of users. So if a weekend tourist is already doing a series of things in this interesting downtown area, how does this little black pavilion in the larger park in the riverfront district fit into their life? How does a family with young children spend the day and stop for a quick snack? Or teenage lovers like hanging out by a fire pit and then they meet friends. The weekend senior citizen who lives across the street comes over and has a cup of tea and then meets someone for lunch. And then a commuter cyclist and how they move through the district. How do these places that we create, like where we make decisions about what it is, what it looks like, who it's for, how do we think about in the planning process and the design process, integrating all of these different ideas and these decisions into a public conversation, and to really make it relevant and interesting, authentic, and beloved first and foremost by the local community. And I'll stop there. Thank you.